Hey guys, welcome to today's episode. I don't know if you're following us on TikTok or Facebook or on the podcast platform, but whatever it is, welcome. We're excited to have you. Rod here at A Better Way to Farm, where we increase yields and improve profits. And today I'm really excited to be sharing with you some things that we've picked up over the last couple of 3 weeks. Just had some stuff going on and I haven't had a chance to necessarily do a lot of lives on Facebook or share some of this information with you. So today we're going to do that. It'll be a little bit longer, but we titled this Roots and Shoots. And what we're going to do is share with you just a whole bunch of things that's come to light, some things that we've worked on, some things that we have studied, some experiences that we've had, some experiences that our team has had. I want to give a big shout out to our team. We have a tremendous team of people that want to help you, and every day they're spending their money, they're studying, they're taking classes, they're doing more and more and more to get more prepared. And the first person I want to talk about is Mason. Mason's a good friend of ours. He lives up in northeast Iowa. And I've had the chance to talk to him a bunch in the last 2 to 3 weeks here, and had a chance to spend some time with him on Tuesday. We were up in Wisconsin. I give another shout out to Dan. I appreciate those guys and their wives. Thanks to Missy, thanks to Elena for being just great farm couples that we love hanging out with and spending time with and studying and learning and getting better. And it's just exciting to see what they're doing. But as I start, I'll talk about Mason. Mason had a field day. I believe it was last Friday, and at Mason's field day, because we had done some earlier, Mason decided he was going to dig a root pit. And I know we talked, and he talked about how deep should I go, and I said, typically we can find roots down about 10 feet deep, and I think that he was kind of tilting his head. I couldn't see him because it was a phone call, and I felt like he kind of tilted his head and was like, yeah, right, we'll see. And so they went out and they got a backhoe, and they hired a backhoe to come in, and they dug a root pit at the end of the rows where they're having their test plot and their field day. And they got down in there and they started digging, and they got to 3 feet, 4 feet, 5 feet, and 6 feet, and they're still finding roots. And they're still finding roots. And it was super interesting. And of course, when we dig a root pit, if you saw us down at Michael and Lorna's when we were down in central Missouri, or if you happen to catch us when we were up at Dan and Elena's up in northern Wisconsin, you know what I do? I take a knife, I just pull out my pocket knife, and I stick it in the bottom of the hole that they dug, and I start pulling it upwards. Why do we do that? We're looking for compaction layers. And guys, I talked about it Tuesday. I'm going to talk about it till the day I quit. One size fits one. There is no one size fits all. Typically, here in the Midwest where I live, not upper, not lower, where I'm at, when I stick that knife in and I start pulling it up, I find 2 compaction layers. There's one somewhere 20 to 22 inches typically. I'm not sure where it comes from. I just kind of assume that, the glaciers put it there or the good Lord put it there, but there is one. And you won't have any trouble. I remember when we were at Lorna's in there in late July, and I'm pulling up on it. She's sitting on the edge of the pit. Her and Kayla are sitting there watching me, and I'm pulling it up, and all of a sudden Lorna goes, I heard that. And as Lorna said, hey, I heard that, I was right where I hit it. It went thunk. And that was the one that was at 22. And then I came on up, and they heard it again. Her and Kayla could hear it again. Theirs was at about 6 inches, typically installed by some kind of tillage that we have been doing on a regular basis. I didn't have the opportunity to get to Mason's field day, and I'm very sorry for that. It just didn't work out. But I don't know what he found for compaction layers. But when I went to Dan's, it's interesting because up there, we were north of Madison, Wisconsin, about an hour, maybe an hour and a half. And as I was up there and I was looking around, and I started to see what he was getting, and it was interesting because they had multiple compaction layers. They have a very different kind of soil. And we went down about 4 foot, and there was a rocky clay there that you couldn't hardly shove the knife into, just period, end of story. Very, very compacted, very, very hard. I think they could probably start a rock quarry right there on his farm. And I think that's pretty normal for where they're at. And that's not good or bad. It's not me throwing shade at anybody. Guys, with our system, what we're all about is taking the hand that you got dealt, that's called the farm you bought, and playing it and getting the most out of it. And so Dan's figured out how to do that. And so then we started coming up, and we have multiple compaction layers there. I think he had 3 other layers, actually. I'd never been any place where we had 4. But it was interesting. The top foot of his soil was really nice, black, just beautiful black soil. And there was one down below that, one, I don't know, somewhere maybe 18 inches. And then there was another one. You went from the clay into the black, and there was a transition, no compaction to speak of. And then about halfway up into that black, we hit another layer, which I assume was put in there by tillage at some point in time. And so it was interesting to see that. But let's talk about the roots part of this, because when Mason started on his journey, because of what we did at Larna's, he started, he takes the knife and you dig down with the backhoe, but then you got to very gently rake the dirt away. Why is that? Because the roots are very tender, they're very small, they're very delicate. And you find those roots that are going down, and they've all got hair roots on them. And at their field day on Friday, they started digging down, they're using their knife, they're flipping it out, and they get all the way down to 6 feet. And they're excited and they're saying, man, this is fantastic. Now, why is that important? Well, we know, according to Dr. Mulvaney, that in the top 6 feet of soil in most of the Midwestern United States, there is somewhere between 360,000 pounds of potassium and 480,000 pounds of potassium. Wow, that's a lot, guys, a lot. The question is, how do we access it? How do we get a hold of it? Well, the first thing we got to do is we got to get the roots in it. If we don't get the roots to it, we're never going to get it. We're never going to get it. And so driving them down is good. So Mason gets down. They've got it down there about 6 feet. And they have their field day. And then I think he went over to Adam and Val's on Saturday. And they had a great event too. Very proud of what they did. Again, didn't get a chance to be there, but I will try to do that next year. But super excited to see what their results are from a planning standpoint. But man, Mason got all excited. So the next day, Sunday, he goes out and he just takes a shovel because he decided since he was down 6 feet, he wanted to see how deep they went. So he goes down in the pit that they dug with the backhoe, track hoe, and he starts digging. And he gets down 3 feet. Now we're 9 feet from the top of the surface. Roots. At 9 feet down, he's still finding roots on his corn plants, guys. So I talked to him today because he was all jazzed up, and I like that. I like it when people get on a journey and he's out here wanting to learn. So he called the guy up, said, bring your track hoe back here. I got something I want to do. And Mason said to the guy with the track hoe, he said, how deep can you go? The guy said 11 feet. Mason said, do it. Dig it 11 feet. I want to see what we got. So they dug a hole, a pit, that was 11 feet down. Mason gets down in there. He starts taking his knife. He's flicking off. And he said somewhere below 10 feet, the roots quit. He didn't get roots down to the 11-foot mark. He only got them down 10 feet and a few inches. Only. Guys, that's fantastic. And so we got to thinking about that and saying, okay, what does this do? Now, I'm going to contrast that to Dan's over in Wisconsin. At Dan's, they went down about 42 inches, somewhere between 3.5 and 4 feet, and they just stopped. Why? Because he hit that layer of dirt that's there, that layer of soil that exists naturally in their soil, and that's all the farther they could go. Guys, I couldn't stick my knife in it. It was very hard to get a root to grow in it. And there's nothing that, you're not going to rip that. You're not going to do anything with that. We're just going to figure out how to farm that top 4 feet. But what we want to do is make sure we're getting as many roots down and growing out as you can. Now, in both instances, in all three instances, whether I was in Missouri, we were at Mason's in northern Iowa, we're up in north Wisconsin, not only do you have the roots going down, but by the time they get down 3 feet-ish, they've grown together. And so this row over here and this row over here have went down, but they've also grown to the point that now they're coming together. So we're actually pulling nutrients and moisture out of the center of the row, not in the top 30 inches, maybe not even in the top 3 feet, but somewhere down there, they grow together. And we're getting a lot more root to soil contact. And guys, roots drive everything. There's no question about that. We know that. You guys know that when we were studying under Francis and learning what we could do there, that we were out digging and taking a shovel, and by the time the corn was 2 foot tall, he wanted to see roots more than 2 foot down into the soil. And there are people who don't ever get a 2 foot root, let alone when the corn's 2 foot tall. He always said what's below is more important than what's above, because it drives everything that's up above it. So that was exciting. So we see these guys, whether it's Missouri or northern Iowa or over northern Wisconsin, it doesn't make any difference. They're driving the roots really deep. 36 inches, 44 inches, 4 foot, 10 feet. Guys, we've known this. We've done work up at Kelowna, Iowa, and we had a root pit up there, and we were down 10 feet and didn't find the end of them, but that was all the deeper that particular hoe could go. And so as we look at these and we talk about why is that important? Well, number one, I've never dug a hole 10 feet deep that I didn't find moist dirt at. Now, make no mistake, this year we have been blessed with rainfall. We're up over 35 inches here where I live, but we didn't have 35 inches of rain, I don't think, in 22 and 23 put together. And so we would go out and dig a post hole, and we might get down 42, 44 inches, and we're just getting powder, pure powder. There's no moisture there. But now here we are driving roots 6, 8, 10 feet deep. Guess what? Once we get down in there, by the time we get to 10 feet, yeah, it's probably going to be clay. It might even be blue clay. It might not be very pretty, but it's moist. And we can talk about how much extra moisture we can take up, how much water can we access. And the fact of the matter is, guys, this is one of the reasons that you can become more drought resistant or more drought tolerant. Now, I'm never going to tell you that you're going to be able to withstand every drought. I mean, I literally sat one time in a field out in Nebraska that we were working on a test plot on, and it literally got to 114 degrees that day, and we sat on top of the hill, and the wind came up and got to blowing about 35 miles an hour, and we literally watched the corn die. Why? Because it was giving off more moisture than those roots could take up. At 114 degrees, with relatively dry soil in the top 3 feet, and a 35 mile an hour wind, it can't bring the water up fast enough, and you can burn up. I want to be crystal clear on that. But guys, I look at all these people who are more drought tolerant, who can survive a longer period of time without rain, who can take a little more temperature. And sometimes that's the difference between true success and a pretty average crop. And we want to see everything we do is designed to keep us in the game as long as possible. Mason with roots over 10 feet down, he's going to stay in the game. Now, there's other things that you can do to be drought resistant. We'll talk about those in another video probably. I don't think I'll have time to get into this today. But guys, as you're listening to this or you're watching this, just know that's one of the things. The second thing, again, it's nutrient availability. You know, I mean, we worry about all of our levels, and if you do some studying and digging, they will tell you that there's about 6,000 pounds of phosphorus in the top 6 inches, just in the top 6 inches of soil. There's P1, there's P2, and then there's phosphorus in there that you would have to ash the soil down to see. And the question becomes, how do we get that to percolate, circulate, and come back into the plant? And then the next thing is the potassium. We know in the top 6 feet, there's 360,000 to 480,000 pounds of K. Mason and I were just talking on the phone, and he said, well, how much is in the top 10 feet? I don't know the answer to that, but I'm going to go on a quest to find out. How much potassium is in the top 10 feet of the average Midwestern farm soil? Why is that so important? Well, if we can access it, if we can drive the roots down into that, and we can exude the acid through the hair roots, and we can pull that potassium back into that root, take it up, translocate it into the shoots, and then into the grain, and we know that we only take off about 0.25 pounds potassium for a bushel of corn. So what does that mean? That means 250 bushel corn is going to be taking off somewhere in the neighborhood of about 65 pounds of K, ballpark. We know that 250 bushel corn, the uptake into the plant, according to the University of Nebraska at Lincoln, the uptake is about 475 pounds. What does that mean? Well, that means if we took 65 pounds out the gate, but we took up 470, that means there's over 400 pounds of potassium left in that stover. Ding, ding, ding. I want you to think about the value of 400 pounds of potassium when you start selling your stocks for 40 bucks a bale. I'm not saying you should or shouldn't. I'm just saying think about it. You guys know one of the deals we want you to do. We just want you to ask questions. We want you to think. We want you to realize and talk about what's good for who. Everything that happens in agriculture is good for somebody. The question is who? Our goal here at A Better Way to Farm is that everything has to be good for you. That's the only thing that matters, is that it is good for the end user. Everything else works out if that works. And so consequently, that's one of the things that we can look at. Let's talk about healthier soil. We're wanting to do regen ag. We're wanting our soils to be healthier. I'm all for that. Number one, let's stop doing the things that we did that made our soils not healthy. That'd be the first step. And then let's talk about what we can do in order to make them more healthy. And one of those things is, as we well know, that there's a symbiotic relationship between a lot of the microbial life in the dirt and the roots. And the more microbial life we can get, the more activity we can get, the better the roots do. But we also know the better the roots do, the more support there is for the microbial life, especially the mycorrhiza fungi. They need those roots in order to live. They also need adequate boron. So if we're boron deficient, we're hurting ourselves. But we'll talk about that on another day also. So life is pretty simple. It's basically a snowball. It's one of two things. That snowball, you're either on the right side of it and you're rolling it and it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger and better and better and better, or you're on the wrong side of it and it's falling apart and it's just... And as we have done the things to make our soil unhealthy, we have been on the wrong side of that snowball. But let's talk about how to get on the right side. Number one, feed the microbial life. And part of that comes due with using the right micronutrients. Number two, make a great place for the microbial life. Why? Because we have lots of roots. And guys, if we can take those roots, instead of being 12 inches or 18 inches or whatever, down, and we can go 4 feet, 6 feet, 10 feet, think how much more area that there is. I want you to think about this. We're all worried about how it is that we're going to get our water to move. Would it make sense to you that water could go down almost like a natural tile line? I'm not saying it's a replacement for tile, because it's not. But if I get to Mason's and he's got roots that go down 10 feet, there's a place for water to go. And that water can slide down through there and get down and get away and get into that deeper spot. Guys, and again, we're making a snowball that's getting bigger and bigger and better. So he drove his roots 10 feet this year, and when he comes back with corn, whether it's beans next year and then corn the next, those pathways are still there. So it's easier to follow those. And the more we do, the more we do. The more we do, the more we get. And so those are really important. And that's why I want to talk about the importance of roots. And then I'm going to switch gears and I want to go over and I want to talk about shoots. Some of you, if you only watch us or if you only hear us on the podcast, I want to encourage you to go to Facebook. You say, I don't do Facebook. That's fine. I really don't either. I look at it for two reasons. One, to see what I need to do here on my business. And two, to see if there's something I can learn. I'm not scrolling looking for who's cute and who's having steak for dinner. But if you will go to Facebook and go to A Better Way to Farm, there are some videos that I did, and I was showing some corn that isn't too far from my house. And guys, this part of this is going to talk about why we must tissue test. We're sitting here, it's late August, early September, and I'm still encouraging you to tissue test. And people are going, why? Why would I want to tissue test? You know, we're at hard dent. We're past hard dent. There's really nothing that we can do. You're right. I'm going to take zero corrective action. So here about a week ago, I pulled two tests. I pulled one on our own farm because I wanted to see how we had done. And I wanted to see what we needed to do different next year. What do we got to change? How are we going to become more effective? And two, I wanted to look at this field that I'd driven by that looked really bad. It was one of those deals that I drove by and I went, oh my goodness, that corn's starting to mature. And I was like, man, this is early, because we were talking, early 20, like August 20, 21, somewhere in there, I don't know. And I was like, that's way too soon to mature. And so But then I drove down and I came back, and coming back, I'm up on top of a little hill and I can look out into it and I say, that's not maturing. That's a deficiency. And so I put it up, and some of you probably commented, and some of you went with exactly what I said. Because we are out here and we tend to look at things and say, okay, what's that deficiency visually? We want to see it. So what do we know? Well, we know that if we have a yellowing in the old plant parts in the lower leaves, and it's a V working its way down from the tip, it's probably nitrogen. We know that if we have yellowing on the older leaves, the bottom leaves, and it's just around the edge and it kind of look yellow and then they actually kind of die off, that's probably potassium. We know that if we go to the top of the plant and we have intervenal striping, yellow striping, that's probably manganese. We know if we're at the top of the plant and the whole thing is yellow, that's probably sulfur. We know if we go to the bottom of the plant, yellow intervenal striping, that's probably magnesium. So I looked this all over and I went, oh my goodness, it's yellow in the top and it's not intervenal striping, it's just yellow in the top. That's a classic sulfur deficiency. And I got all excited because I was going to do this great video, and I was going to talk to you guys about this classic sulfur deficiency, and here's what you could learn. And I had several people on that video say, that's sulfur. And I agree with you. Just went ahead and tissue tested it. And guys, this is why the tissue test, one of the many reasons it's so important. I was dead wrong. I have the results right here. Right here are the results from that field. Sulfur was sufficient. It looked like a stereotypical sulfur deficiency. Sulfur was sufficient. Let's talk about what wasn't. It was deficient in nitrogen. It was deficient in phosphorus. It was deficient in potassium. And it was deficient in zinc. Interesting. So my first thought on the way by the very first time when I was going the wrong direction and I couldn't really see the top of the plant, and I said, that's maturing. I was kind of right. It's not maturing. It's dying. There's a difference. Guys, I want my corn crop to dry. That's D-R-Y, down. I take a look at what's happening here, and that corn is in the process of dying off. It will dry very slowly. Why? Because of the fact that we know that when we're dependent only on the weather, it's a slower dry. And the fact of the matter is, if we dry it down and the corn is green, it helps translocate moisture. And so this tissue test, and that's the shoots part of this for today, we've talked about the roots, we've looked at the roots, and we've went after the shoots and saying, okay, what are we going to learn here? Now, I also have my own tissue test. Guys, I would love for you to meet with me sometime and take a look at my soil test, because my soil test and my tissue test don't necessarily correlate really well. This farm is a farm that we purchased recently. It didn't have much in the way of phosphorus or potassium. And of course, nitrogen is hard to hold because we have a low CEC and low organic matter. And I came back and my test showed that I'm high in nitrogen. I'm sufficient in phosphorus. I am just a tad low in potassium. Everything else is good. I dialed it in. My boron need was astronomical. And I actually why'd I do this? Because I learned something. This year I applied too much boron. I put on more than I needed. And the fact of the matter is that's not cost effective. My boron is actually excessive, and so is my zinc. So next year I can back those up a little bit, even though I went off of the soil test recommendations. Obviously my response was good, and we'll go with that. Here's the two things that I really learned and have me scratching my head. My iron in my plant is low. I have incredibly high iron in my field, incredibly high, and yet I'm low in iron. Not to surprise me, my magnesium in the tissue test is also excessive, very excessive. We have super high mag soils, and so we continue to put on high cal, low mag lime in an attempt to fix that. And I think there was a correlation between the fact that my magnesium is excessive and my K is low. Why is that? Because we know that too much magnesium in the soil can overwhelm the potassium and not let potassium into the plant. And even though we put on a high rate of a very high quality starter, we're still getting some antagonism there. You know, about V8, when the starter runs out and the soil needs to take over, what really took over was the magnesium was beating up on the potassium and wouldn't let it in the plant. It was being a bully. And so it's just interesting to say, okay, so next year we'll probably foliar feed a little more potassium in an attempt to overcome that. But guys, I wouldn't have known that if I hadn't have tissue tested. And people say, well, you know, you're not going to do anything. It's a waste of time. It's a waste of money. It is not. It is not a waste of time. It is not a waste of money, because the question is, what can we learn? How do we make this better? And what are we going to do next year to improve this? And that's what we're always looking at. So guys, I hope you found some value in this. I'm super jacked up, this whole deal of doing these root digs. And I tell guys, just take a post hole digger out in your cornfield and dig a hole 42 inches deep. Reach down as far as you can with that knife and start pulling it up. Find your compaction layers. And then if you want to know maybe what we would recommend, reach out to us. You just reach out to us with a message.